to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 76, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. I think you can probably hear that my voice still isn't quite back to normal. Whatever virus it was that I picked up ran me over for 2 solid days, but thankfully moved on quickly. I noted that I haven't been sick very much this winter, if at all, and I think I was starting to feel a little bit invincible. I didn't feel bad enough to stay in bed, but I wasn't at the top of my game. I just didn't have a lot of energy. So what I ended up doing was sewing more sawtooth stars for my Bernina University jacket. And if you're new to the podcast and haven't heard about this project, I'm tagging along with the group of employees from our local quilt store who are going to Bernina University because it's in Salt Lake City this year, and that's fairly close to us. I asked the store owner if I could go, if I paid my own way, if she would include me in her group, and she was happy to do that. So the group of us that is going plans to make quilted jackets for each of us to wear. And each person is choosing a different designer. So one person's doing Tula Pink, another person's doing K-Facet. I decided to use some Tim Holtz fabric because I have quite a large Tim Holtz fabric stash. He's one of my favorite designers, probably the most favorite designer. And I'm excited about how the jacket's turning out. We're all following the beachcomber pattern from Laundry Basket Quilts. I'm sort of following that pattern. I don't really look good in cropped tops or cropped jackets, so I want my jacket to be a little bit longer. I'm using McCall's 8560, which I mocked up in some pre-quilted fabric from Joann's, and I like the way that one fits. So that's the pattern that I'm going to be using. But I'm still making the sawtooth stars, and I have enough now that I think I'm ready to start laying out how I want them to look on the jacket. So that's what I did last week while I was feeling a bit under the weather. I do need to get a jump on making some pants and some tops for this summer, or the hot weather's going to be here before I know it and I won't have anything to wear. Beyond that, on nice days, I try to get outside and work. We have a lot of stuff to do in the garden. We got piglets over the weekend. We're raising 4 pigs again this year. And the chicks I got at the farm store a couple of weeks ago are getting bigger. I noticed today that they started getting their big chicken feathers, so that's exciting. My Joann Fabrics is down to bare shelving. In fact, they have cordoned off parts of the store. I don't think they're going to be in business too much longer. I heard a rumor to the effect of the end of April. There are plenty of podcast episodes and YouTube videos out there where content creators are talking about alternatives to Joann Fabrics, and no doubt I will probably throw in my 2 cents worth in an upcoming episode about shopping online for fabric or alternatives to buying fabric, so stay tuned for that. Let's jump right into today's episode. It's an interview with Sylvia Pippen, who lives in La Conner, Washington, and that's up in the northwest corner of Washington State. Sylvia does quilting and sashiko and appliqué and surface design, and I thought it would be fun to have a conversation with her about how she combines all of those elements in her designs. I was unaware until we started talking that apparently her mother, Kitty Pippen, was a very accomplished artist and designer and was part of Sylvia's inspiration for her work, and she's carrying her mother's enthusiasm forward with her own artistic flair. So without further ado, we'll get into the discussion, and I hope you will learn something about Sashiko. I didn't know very much about it, and it was interesting to hear Sylvia talk about it. So welcome to the podcast, Sylvia.
Thank you so much, Janet.
So I usually start out my podcast interviews by asking, who taught you how to sew and how old were you when you learned?
It's my infamous and famous mother, Kitty Pippen, who taught me to sew and basically has taught me everything about quilting. I started sewing at 4 years old. My mother was making braided rugs. We would go to thrift stores and buy wool coats and wash them. The spell of woolite is sort of, part of my fiber. And the big jars of buttons. But she would be working on these massive braided rugs, which are still in our homes today. And she would give me strips of wool and I would sew those together. And, I thought I was making a rug. I thought I was really important. And, I caught the fiber bug very early. And what's really curious, when I look at pictures of me sewing, she's got me sewing with my right hand, and I am definitely left-handed. So over the years, my mother, she made clothes, she did silk screening, she made quilts, but, sort of traditional quilts. And later on, and then of course I learned how to sew clothes from her but she at age 70 discovered Japanese fabrics and she started a whole second career and, made quite a name for herself as a quilter. So as she was going through that process, she was teaching, and I was living in Hawaii at the time. And I would come over from Hawaii and help her at her workshops, sort of as a gopher. But I really caught the bug, appliqué, because I was working in the National Tropical Botanical Garden on Kauai. I've been a gardener longer than I've been a quilter. And I was so inspired by the tropical flowers and the massive foliage. So my mother had taught me Sashiko, and I did traditional kimono, family crests, and geometrics. But I just thought, well, why couldn't you do a little applique and then use the Sashiko to outline foliage? It would be a lot easier than doing it in applique. So I actually took plumeria from the gardens. I took care of 50 varieties of plumeria, bring them home, I'd lay them out and literally draw around them. And I came up with my first block, which is plumeria. And I, did it stitched in white and made the double petaled, flowers out of batik or whatever. And I really, really liked the effect. I thought, onto something here. This is so that's what started it, was that. So I was still, coming over and traveling with my mother, and she was getting more and more popular as a teacher. And at age 80, she wrote her first book, which was Quilting with Japanese Fabrics, had 10 printings with martingale. So it was, it's a really pretty incredible book. So she machined pieces, but she hand quilts everything. Her design sense is really incredible. She grew up in China, lived there till she was 18, so has had a very affinity for Asian textiles and art, and that shows in her quilt designs. She was a huge influence, and really she's been my only teacher. And we had so much fun designing quilts together. She was just a master at designing. So I'd put a bunch of individual blocks together and take it to my mother and say, help. And she would come up with a great design. So
Couple of thoughts there. The first is
yes.
that it's amazing to start a new career at age 70 and to keep going. Is your mom still alive?
No, she died in 98. And we moved them up here from Chico because they were in an assisted living situation they didn't like, and there was no family really close by. So we brought them up to LaConner, and we had 4 great years here, where my mother had exhibits at the LaConner Quilt Museum, and she taught in the area. So she had a whole lots of groupies. So they would come to visit her. She would come to all my classes, and I had a shop here in town, so she would come and hold court in my shop. And she was very sharp and to the end. And she made her last quilt when she was 97. She just had macular degeneration, but I helped her with it. And she very she just had this can-do attitude. She took it from wherever she was. If she had macular degeneration and was less than perfect, that's okay. I mean, she was a perfectionist, certainly, but she had this sort of joie de vivre about creating that, no self-doubt. Just did it because it was so much fun. Yeah, pretty amazing. And then she would come to my classes, and she's just a very charismatic, 5 foot positive, amazing woman, but she would take over my classes. I couldn't let her come until about 11 because I'd have to, I'd want to get my teaching in before she took over. But,
Sure.
I would find that my students would disappear into another room, and then she'd be showing them paper piecing, something totally irrelevant to what I was teaching. But yeah, she was just charming and wonderful. We had a great time together. She really got me launched. I was living on Kauai, and as I designed some patterns, one of the reps from Hoffman, who would travel around from the islands, Hoffman Fabrics, introduced my designs to the various stores in the islands. And that it was really Kapaya Stitchery that helped get me started on Kauai. And then I started printing designs on cloth, sort of. I mean, I call it Sashiko for dummies, but not to the people who buy them. The stitching designs are already printed, and it just makes it very easy. You don't have to do the pattern transfer. But I did a butterflies and Sashiko, went to a t-shirt shop, and they printed it on cloth. It was a little 200-year-old kimono designs of butterflies and clouds, and I added marbled butterflies, hand marbled butterflies, and that became still one of my most popular designs after 20 plus years.
Could you maybe describe the characteristics of Sashiko for listeners who might not be familiar with that technique? And am I correct that
Sure,
it originated in Japan?
it did. And it was, it's a very old stitching technique, with very utilitarian, origins. It was used to sandwich, much like, sandwich a quilt, only for jackets or tabi socks and that kind of thing for warmth. And there wasn't a lot of cotton in northern Japan. It was hemp and other, plant-based fibers. So any cotton they had was sort of used in a very, sparing way. They used every scrap they had, but they used their beautiful, centuries old designs, these Kamon family crests that are, used for businesses or your family. They're just perfect for Sashiko. And then of course there's all the beautiful geometric designs as well. But Sashiko is simply it's a simple running stitch is all it is. And it translates as little stabs, because you're pulling a heavy needle and a double heavy thread through fabric. So you've got to have a needle with a shaft that's big enough to pierce a hole in the fabric, so you can pull it easily through. The Sashiko is supposed to be 2/3 stitch to 1/3 space. That's kind of traditional. The length, the number of stitches per inch is, I mean, they're rules. I couldn't go and teach in Japan because I haven't been certified, and I'm sort of, I'm way out in left field as far as what I do. My feeling is you establish your own stitch length, and what looks good to you is, that's what you want to stick with. Basically, you want to use the same stitch length throughout the piece, but that's all open to interpretation as well. So
What is the thread? Is it a silk thread or a cotton thread?
no, it's an Egyptian cotton. It's loosely twisted, and you use the whole thing. You don't break it down like you do embroidery thread. So, and they're different weights. I use Olympus and Daruma thread. One comes in a skein, one comes on a card. I really like Daruma the best. I get it from Orimono Imports, and comes in a huge array of colors and variegated. Daruma is a better quality thread. So that's my favorite. And you don't have to use a traditional Sashiko thread. I use a John James #3 embroidery needle.
So we've talked a little bit about the thread and the needle that you use. The Sashiko that I've seen has almost always been on a blue background. Is that traditional?
Well, the indigo, yeah, background is traditional, but I use all kinds of different fabrics. I use usually the fabric is a looser weave because it's easier to push your needle through it. Like Essex linen cotton is a wonderful weight for doing sashiko. Because I combine applique with it, I've used other fabrics like cotton Bella Black, Kona cotton, and then I use Moda marbles just to give a little texture behind it. So those are lighter weight fabrics of Moda marbles, but they print well and they're easy to needle, and you have a little bit of texture behind it as far as the pattern of the fabric. So, but anything goes. I even use a batik for a series of my panels, but it's a batik that is a lot of batiks are pretty tightly woven, but this one you can push a needle through.
Can you talk a little bit about how you combine Sashiko with applique?
Sure. Usually the way I approach a design, so I'm looking at a quilt that's all orchids. One of my jobs in the botanical garden was to tend the orchids. So usually what I would do is design the flower first, and I like to pre-form my flowers using the postage label or Mylar method or appliqué, so that I have the actual flower is formed in my hand. I need to see it without turnover allowances, or it's need to be really precise. I'll lay it out and then I start designing the foliage around that. Of course, I look at tons of photos of the actual orchid, to sort of see what it's like. I do a lot of tracing, and then tweaking, reversing, enlarging. My printer is my friend. Yeah, that's really the process. I find that the foliage behind the applique is what really works, and I find that I just did a quilt of orchids that's all sashiko in color, and it's effective, I would say, but it's not as punchy as certainly the applique. I've stopped making applique and sashiko kits because they're just too much work to source all the fabrics and cut all the fabrics. So I'm trying to focus on designing new designs and not, sitting there doing rote kit work.
I did see on your website that you have a block of the month program. Is that something that you're currently running?
Yes, I do. We're going to be sending out we're doing a quarterly block of the month shipment, which saves a lot on postage. So it's called Ocean, and it's all sea themes, and it's really a sampler quilt. So you can join at any time. You can catch up with the program, or you could buy it outright. And I'm also just selling the blocks individually as well. So yeah, and I try to put a block of the month out every year. So I better get busy for next year.
I'm sure between where you live, which is in the northwestern part of Washington state, and your work as a gardener, I'm sure that you have just a ton of inspiration. It's probably like drinking from a fire hose. You may have more
It's
ideas than
true.
you do have time.
That's right. Yeah, and then of course I go to Hawaii because my grandkids are there. And so that's a whole other realm of inspiration. No, there's no end of inspiration. It's and the design process is like trial and error.
Have you been to Japan? Have you taken any classes?
I have not been to Japan. I would love to go. I have not been. My mother went on a textile tour with Kasuri Dye Works, who she brought them lots of business, and they, really, really revered her. So she went on textile buying tours with them, if you can imagine, in her 80s. So she's my mother's a hard act to follow. I'm 76, and I'm, it's like I don't want to. I've done lots of traveling and teaching, and I don't want to do that anymore. My mother is gallivanting all over the place, sort of like, oh, Ma. You got so much energy. Of course, she wasn't running it as a business. It was
True.
just pure joy. She loved the attention, and she was a great speaker. She get really high, and she was funny, and great in front of an audience.
My mother is 83 and is still running a metal stamping company in Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh my gosh,
Yes,
isn't
and
that
I
something?
think my sister and I would like her to become familiar with the concept of retirement. So yeah, when you have those mothers that have seemingly endless energy.
Yeah, they're quite an inspiration and a tough act to follow. I always
Yeah.
introduce myself as Sylvia Pippen, better known as Kitty Pippen's daughter. That's you never catch up.
So you teach
Yeah,
locally, you do workshops?
I do. I teach in my studio slash shop. I have a little retail shop, right? All my products are here and displayed, so people can drop by for appointment. And that's worked out really well. And I have a really nice space to work in. My printer, who's printed all my panels for the last 10 years, has taken over all the shipping, packaging, and it's great because it's freed me up to design and do other things. And I don't have this assembly line clutter in my house. So I can be free to create.
So if
Yeah.
somebody wanted to get started with Sashiko, what would you advise? Would you advise maybe starting with a kit or taking a class or what?
Getting a simple kit with it already, the pattern already stamped on the fabric, like there's lots of them that come from Japan, I think is a great place to start because it helps you kind of develop your stitch length, and you're getting right to it instead of, how do I transfer, this design onto, dark fabric, and how do I, here's this line now, how do I, establish a good stitch length. I think you can't beat taking a class to get you sort of started with the right techniques. There are different techniques that really help protect your hands for one thing, and because you don't want to bunch up a lot of stitches on a needle and have to get out a come along to pull it. So you need to keep it very open, and keep your needle flat. You almost pleat it onto the needle as opposed to, stabbing up and down. Those techniques are useful to have someone show you. At least those are my techniques that I use.
And maybe I should have asked you this at the beginning, but in Japan, sashiko was traditionally used for what? Clothing? To decorate clothing? Or you talked a little bit about kind of,
It was used for clothing and mending. So but they would make these absolutely beautiful hatted jackets for the firemen, and they would wet them, and they'd turn all the sashiko to the inside, fight the fires, and then they would turn them to the outside for their parades and their special occasions. I mean, their whole books of fishermen's jackets and firemen's jackets, and just beautiful geometric, sashiko designs all over them. So, I mean, the Japanese are just, genius of combining something that's, utilitarian, and then, so artful and timeless and, you know, beautiful.
but you could
Um,
probably say the same thing about quilts. I mean, quilts are utilitarian, and yet you've taken
exactly.
sashiko and taken it in a new direction,
And it's
combining.
totally frivolous. Yeah, it says no utilitarian purpose whatsoever. So the difference too is that they would do the sashiko through all three layers, the sandwiched layers. whereas I only do it as a surface embellishment because it's just too hard to pull to do it through 3 layers. And then I go back and quilt it next to the Sashiko later, either by machine or by hand. So it uses a surface embellishment.
Do you also
Yeah.
print your own fabric? I saw something in your bio about cyanotype.
Yes, I do. Kind of got hooked on cyanotype in Hawaii. I happened to get some treated fabric, and cyanotype is an old photographic process that was used to make blueprints. But you can use it on paper or you can use it on cloth. So I buy it already treated, it's not toxic. And so what you do is you lay leaves, pressed leaves or fresh flowers on it, put glass on top, and then you expose it. This is dry out in the sun. And it depends on, the angle of the sun, whether it's cloudy, it could be anywhere from, 6 minutes to 45 minutes. You have to read the sun. I also have a sun lamp, so you can, control it. Anyway, I did a block of the month. It's really popular called Making Waves. And what I did was I drew on an acetate sheet. I drew waves with felt tip pen. They looked terrible. They're like scratchy and weird. And then when I printed them, I was like, oh my goodness. It lets some of the light through and, so you get variations of blue, and then this deep cyanotype where there's no blockage, it turns this deep, deep blue. And then I thought, well, this is perfect. We'll just add Sashiko to this. So I have 5 wave panels that I've sold a lot of them. We're getting back into printing those. And then we're also printing Japanese stencil designs with cyanotype, which are lovely and kind of a nice coordinate with other Sashiko blocks. So it's sort of a new product we're working on. It's really fun. And I do work with my most popular workshop because we have a half acre of gardens here. And so people go out and they pick stuff, they bring stuff. I've got, tons of, source material for them, birds and whales and all kinds of things they can lay into there, and they create their own fabrics. And it's very serendipitous. You don't know how it's going to turn out exactly. What you do after it's been exposed to the sun, you rinse it in cold water and a dash of peroxide, which sort of counterintuitive, but it actually darkens the fabric. And you have to rinse all the chemicals out, and then it's a print on one side. So the original fabric was white, so the back side is white, and it's stable. You wouldn't want to hang the quilt in sun as you wouldn't any quilt, and you can't wash it in phosphate soap or anything like that. And you can do it. I've gotten fabrics that are like velvet, velveteen, silks, and beautiful. They make beautiful prints. Yeah, it's really fun.
So is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want to talk about?
I love to teach. I feed off my students as well as I hopefully give them, some inspiration. But I get all my best ideas from my students about the latest and greatest, tool and technique, so it's a very sharing, fun, so I really enjoy that, and I'm enjoying teaching here. I'm going to try to if I can get up to speed and do Zoom classes. I have all of my mother's quilts. That's the other thing I really want to do, guild talks and feature my mother's quilts because they're extraordinary and they're, covered with Sashiko. So I want to be sure to share those, with other quilters. I really, really enjoy what I do. I feel like, I'm finally in a place where I'm focusing on design and less on the business manufacturing side. And that feels really good. And I'm not jumping on airplanes and flying off to Australia or the Arctic, which is really fun, but it's pretty tiring.
Yes, yes. So you have a website. It's at www.sylvia-pippen.com. I will put links to your website and your other social media in the show notes. But I really appreciate you joining me today.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be interviewed by you. Thank you so much.
I am really intrigued by this cyanotype printing. So I told Sylvia that I may try to get up to her studio to take a class sometime when I'm over visiting my daughter in Seattle. If you'd like to leave feedback about the show or about this particular episode, you can do so via a comment on the show notes page, which is at www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. You can use the fan mail feature. You can email me directly at janet@janetzabo.com, and I do try to answer all emails. I really appreciate the ratings and the reviews that you've been leaving at Apple Podcasts. They really do help other people to find the show. If you want to see photos of what I'm working on, the best place to do that is at my blog, which is at www.janetzabo.com. They also get posted weekly on the Straight Stitch Podcast Instagram account. So if you haven't checked that out, go to Instagram and look for the Straight Stitch Podcast and follow me on Instagram. So I think that'll do it for this episode. And until next week, I hope you have a great week and that you get to go sew something.